Beautiful.
All right. Oh, I didn't do that.
I did.
Oh, okay.
Do we hit continue? What do we do?
I just hit continue.
All right. Okay.
All right.
So we're going to talk about birds and wildlife. Hi, Carol and Cindy. Next. Okay, so this is kind of what we're going to be talking about. A little bit of an introduction, gear, exposure, composition, human behavior, bird behavior, storytelling, focus, editing, birds in flight, and ethics. Next. Our goal is to introduce you to birds and wildlife photography. We hope that something you see will or learn will inspire you to try it. Much bird and wildlife photography is up to split decisions in the field. Everything happens fast. You'll miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And observe other photographers' photographs, how they were created. You study them and you think about them and you decide whether something inspires you. Next. And gear. We got cameras, and I'm not going to go into specific cameras, but just there's so many different kind of cameras out there and so many different decisions. You're going to use what you already have, but things to think about are, do you want the smallest, the lightest, the quietest? Is cost an issue? Bridge cameras with good zoom capabilities. I think that's what Jeanette has. Crop sensor, APS-C bodies, cameras give good reach advantage. Full frame cameras, you can get a higher quality pictures. If you're looking for a camera, consider one with robust autofocus tracking, good low light and ISO capabilities, and high frames per second. Lenses, you need telephoto zoom, at least 400 millimeter lenses. A couple of companies that I know of that Nikon has a 200 to 500 lens. Sony has the 200 to 600. Tamron makes a 150 to 600. Canon has a 100 to 400. Prime lenses or fast glass are sharp and they're good in low light, but they're heavy and they're expensive. I know that Sony has one out that's a 600 millimeter f4, but it's $12,000 and I can't lift it. So, I mean, that's not an option for me. Teleconverters, and they come in different strengths, 1.4 up to 2.0. They'll offer you greater reach, but you're going to lose light and it might compromise the sharpness. Memory card. You need a fast memory card. If you're shooting and if you're just got that shutter pressed down and you're shooting really, really fast, I know it happens to me because I don't have the best memory card. Eventually it slows things down because it's trying to write to the card. So you want one that's fast enough to keep up with your camera. Tripod. Think about quality, and there's Cindy's tripod. There's nothing better than a high quality tripod, sturdy, and make sure it's high enough for you. Gimbal head allows pan and tilt without effort. Monopod is easier to move with, lighter than a tripod. I personally do not like monopods. I've tried one and I don't use them. I find them kind of tipsy, and honestly, if you're out there looking for birds in the woods, who wants to drag that kind of stuff with you? But there are times when they would be appropriate. Clothing. Clothes for function, vests with pockets. That's something I don't have and I need because they really is a good thing to have. Sturdy shoes, long pants, even in hot weather. And by the way, you should have long pants and you should be able to tuck them into your socks in tick season. Camouflage or dark colors. Avoid bright colors and white because birds associate that with danger. And the exception is birding for hummingbirds in a garden or in hunting season. Bean bag, and there's Cindy's bean bag there, is an excellent way to support your camera and lens where a tripod isn't practical. They're designed to rest over a car door or support your lens on the ground for low angle shooting. That's something I wish I had. Remote trigger. And this would be used for wildlife with predictable behavior, such as a hummingbird coming to a feeder. So that would be a situation where you'd be using your tripod and you'd have it all set up and aimed at the spot where you know the bird is going to come. And then if you're far enough away, you can trip the trigger and get your shots without scaring the bird away. Next, exposure. Exposure and lighting. Manual mode. It's really recommended that you use manual mode. Full manual gives you the control. You can choose what you want. I don't actually know how to use those other aperture or shutter speed modes, but they do recommend that you use full manual. And it says to use the histogram or warning zebras, which is going to give you flashing lights if you are overexposed. Shutter speed, high, as high as 2000 or even greater for birds in flight. And aperture, usually 6.3 to f8. I think that varies depending on what lenses you're using. My personal thing is f8, I like that. It's kind of like the sweet spot on my lens, and I almost never change that. I'll change my ISO and my shutter speed, but rarely will I change the f-stop, because I feel like when you have, if you have it wide open to let the most light in, you might lose some of the detail in the bird. White balance. I read some stuff that suggested daylight, but I also read that auto white balance is a good choice for changing light and birds moving about. If you shoot raw, don't worry about it. Raw files allow you to easily adjust the white balance in post without losing quality. Besides that, if I'm out shooting, I don't want to have to fool through. I've got enough on my mind to be changing my shutter speed or my ISO or my f-stop if I need to, without having to worry about changing the white balance. I just never would think of it in situations where things are happening fast. Autofocus. You're going to use autofocus. And continuous frame rate. If you're using just single exposures, you're going to miss a lot. You want continuous frame rate and you want it high. My personal thing is every camera these days, I think, will shoot to around 10 frames a second at least. Some of them are a lot higher. Mine goes to 20, and I keep it turned down to 10 because I just don't want that many pictures. Next. Animals are most active early morning and late afternoon, and the light is the best in the early and late, which is, I think we all already know that. And there she's got a merganser in the, I think that's morning light, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, about 7:45, and then the elk is late afternoon.
And the light is really pretty on those times of the day. Direct light is more likely to bring out the feather detail in birds. Ambient light, which I actually had to look that up because I didn't really understand what ambient light was, and I'm still not sure I understand it completely. It says it's light not added to an image, usually refers to natural light. It casts a soft light in every direction, no specific directionality. So my interpretation of that is like a day that might be bright without maybe some light cloud cover. Birds with light and dark parts are difficult to expose for, and sometimes do better in ambient light. And in my mind, that would be something like an eagle that has the white head and tail, and you're trying to shoot, and it's real hard to make a decision about how to expose for it. Next. Backlighting. In backlighting, you have the subject is between you and the light source, and it can create a silhouette. And sometimes if you're lucky, you can get like a rim of light around the animal. And I think I kind of did it on that bird. Next. And another example of backlighting. And that did create a nice light around the edge of the bird. Is that a snowy or a white egret or gray egret?
It's a great egret.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that came out really beautiful. Next. Low key is dramatic. Lots of blacks, dark tones, shadows, reduced lighting to produce an image with striking contrast. A light subject with dark background is a good way to understand what's happening. And what you end up doing is underexposing for the background. So you're going to expose for the bird. And if the background is dark, you end up with that kind of situation. And then high key on the left is the exact opposite. You have bright and highlights dominated by ranges of whites, minimal blacks and midtones, light and airy, best when the sky is overcast or in the snow. You're going to be overexposing by 1 to 2 stops. Intentional overexposing of the background makes the subject stand out. Often a slower shutter speed is used in addition to the exposure compensation, but be careful not to blur the subject with a shutter speed that's too slow. Flash. Using flash has never been scientifically proven harmful to wildlife. However, it is up to you to use discretion and keep the animal's well-being in mind. Subjects may be startled or depart. Nocturnal birds might cause brief impairment of their vision. Next. Composition. So I think Cindy had a different intention with these than the way I interpreted it, but the foreground on the bird on the left, the towhee, I think is helpful to it. It gives you a sense of where the bird is. And then the goose doesn't really show too much of the foreground. Is that the way you meant that one, Cindy?
Yeah, pretty much. Just
Okay.
the foreground with the towhee is a little messy. And then the goose on the right, the foreground is a little cleaned up so you can actually see the whole bird head to web.
Okay. Sorry, I lose my place. Hang on. Next. Talk a little bit of creativity. And of course, the birds are the ones being creative, not me. But it's a couple of, if you just happen to capture the pose, and it looks like the one on the right is on a balance beam. And then that's American robin. And then the indigo bunting. Hey, that's an indigo bunting. Does that look like your bird, Bruce?
Mm.
That's on the left, and he was shaking. It wasn't the best picture, but I like the feathers all fluffed out. Just showing a little bit of.
The bird I saw, the back was just bright blue. I mean, almost
Probably.
electric.
Okay. Anyway, that's an indigo bunting, so maybe you might have seen a different bird. I don't know.
I love that photo, Carol.
You'll see it again in a different form. Next. This is not really what it's supposed to be. It's as close as I could find to it in my pictures. Bird in heaven is if you can happen to capture a bird with their wings completely wide out like an angel, and that's just what it's referred to. So that one wasn't really the best example, but it's the best I had. Next. And a couple more ideas on being creative in your composition. The bird on the right is a hermit thrush.
Yeah.
And it was, to have the back of the bird instead of the front of the bird just shows it from a different angle, and it shows how it's beautiful in its own way. And then the bird on the left is upside down eating. And I think I actually did some sharpening, and I played around with editing on that one a lot to make it more creative to my eye. I think I erased some stuff out of the picture too. That's okay. You can do that if you want. Next. And simplify. If you have a chaotic picture, the viewer will get lost. So one of the nice things, if you can get a bird that has a very beautiful, clean background, it really shows the bird off very nicely. I think that's what is that?
That is a dark-eyed junco.
Oh, it's a junco. Okay.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
pretty. And what's funny about dark-eyed juncos, until you pay attention to them and look at them, they're a small bird and you don't really notice how beautiful they are until you see them up close. And I've had them for years in the wintertime, not in the summer, in the driveway. They're pecking around in the driveway and nobody paying any attention to them. And they're really quite pretty. Next. And background, and again, it's trying to get a clean background is it really helps the picture a lot. And if you can create separation between the bird and the background, get down low to the bird's level if possible. And the one on the right is probably looking up at it more, but the one on the left is a pretty close angle or a pretty close eye level. The closer that you are to the bird and the further it is from the background, the smoother your background is going to be. I think the bird on the left might have something like, I don't know, maybe a house, or there's something back there.
Yeah,
other
actually, that's down at Fort Monroe, and
Uh-huh.
you believe, I absolutely believe that those are the red bricks from the Chamberlain.
Wow. Okay.
And because the Chamberlain was so far away and I was so close to the bird, that actually is the red brick. And believe it or not, that is like a grout line there.
Wow.
So that's just an example of how beautiful you can make a background, you know, with a red brick or with a, you know, red brick.
Yeah. And there's always, the blue sky is always a wonderful background. It shows off the birds beautifully. And I think that was I forgot what that is.
Blue-headed vireo.
Yes. He's pretty. Next. So here's something for you to think about. Background, is it distracting or is it enhancing? Now, also, I want to mention this ahead of time, so we talk about it a little bit later, but I don't have a picture with it, is the rule of thirds. And this bird fits the rule of thirds pretty nicely. But anyway, this bird, this is a swamp sparrow, and he was up at Dutch Gap. So he does have a rather busy background, but the background is his habitat. And it's the reeds and the swampy area down there. I like it that way.
And you know, the more I look at this picture, I love the background. What I don't like are the two little dried up pods at the bottom, because I look at the bird, but I keep wanting to look down at those pods. And it's just unfortunate that I couldn't crop them out without, you know, so I left them in.
Yeah, they don't really bother me, but I mean, if you were editing, I mean, you could always edit them out, I guess, if you wanted to, but I don't know. I kind of like them. It's his habitat.
Exactly.
Next, I got to pay attention where I am.
And this is another example of the squirrel on the left is a Delmarva. And the squirrel on the right is a gray squirrel, but you can see the difference in all of the distracting background with the squirrel on the left. And yeah, it would have been a really pretty picture without all that stuff in it. The squirrel on the right, yeah, there's a couple of trees, but the squirrel on the right has a much cleaner background.
Yeah. We just need to flip those squirrels, because the one on the left is a much more desirable one.
I know. I know.
He's only found in Chincoteague, I believe.
Yep, that's right.
Next.
And just a little bit more about, you know, a very cluttered background or foreground and background on the left. And that's a really, you know, it's a really, maybe a nice picture, but I keep, even though the bird is beautiful, I keep wanting to look at everything around the bird. Whereas the semi-palmated sandpiper on the right, you can tell he's on the beach, and yeah, there's a little bit of debris in the sand, but it doesn't make you want to look at the sand. It makes you want to look at the bird.
But on the good side of that, the one on the left, which I forgot what you said that is, he's a beautiful bird.
A dusky grouse in the rain times. Yeah.
Even though he's got quite a bit going on in his on the bottom part of the screen, his head came up to a nice clear spot, and I think that saves it. I like it.
I like it.
Now, to me, the only thing distracting is whatever the dark spot is in the background, and there's not, nothing you can do about that.
Yeah.
But I like the picture. But it's a good example of the clutter and no clutter. Next. And the rule of thirds, I think everybody kind of knows the rule of thirds. Basically, you want to keep your bird off center and let him, it balances the picture and it makes it feel more comfortable to the viewer. And then the other side of that is if you have a bird that is looking straight at you, you can center the subject and it works. Really supposed to. And that's a white-eyed vireo. Next.
This is just an example of given your subject a little space to move in the picture. The hummingbird on the left has nowhere to go in the picture. So, it's got a beautiful background, but there's just nowhere for the bird to go. And then the one on the right, that is a female redstart. And that was actually right before she took flight. So at least she's got some movement and she has some place to go and a direction to go to in the photograph.
Yeah, the poor hummingbird, it just bothers me. It feels like he's just going to bang into the other side of that picture.
Exactly.
And I see so many pictures where people do that. And if you start looking at pictures of birds, you'll see that a lot where they don't give that poor little thing anywhere to go. And it just needs a little bit more space. Next. Point of view, eye level. If you can get down to the ground and get eye level, you can get a real, it really helps to get a good picture of the bird. Or if you can get high, and in the case of the eagle, I was standing on the top of a hill and he was flying kind of low. I was not up in the sky. It helps you to get a nice perspective. Point of view is a relationship between the photographer and the bird. If you want the viewer to connect with the bird, take a shot at eye level. There will be an emotional response and the viewer will like the image. Next. The bird's environment can create a birdscape. And they also call this small in frame. So you're seeing where the birds live and stuff like that. So it's almost like a landscape with the birds in it. Next. Composition. We've got a lot on composition, and actions tell a story. We've got a lot on storytelling and activities. Action shots tell a story. Flying, catching food, posturing, etc. The viewer typically views a picture from left to right and top to bottom and in odd numbers. So the turtles are a perfect example of that. Your eye flows really nice down the picture looking at those turtles. Your subject should fill about a third of the frame. That's a suggestion, because they also say you can fill the frame, blow it right up and get it, the whole bird in the frame. Make the bird fill up the frame. So it depends on what you're trying to do. Crop for composition. You should always have, you're going to crop in birds photography, unless you've got some kind of a bird that loves you and lets you walk right up and stick your camera in its face, you're going to have to crop afterward. The birds are not going to let you get close. But you want to crop for composition, balance, or intimacy. And you shouldn't have your bird touching the edge of the frame. Eye contact and profile. Usually you want a profile of a bird is usually what people like to see. And you'll see one eye, and your eye needs to be visible and it needs to be in focus. And we talked about point of view just a second ago, and we'll talk a little bit about reflections and shadows. Next.
I just wanted to show you, this is called a reflecting pool, where we're talking about backyard habitat. And I actually built that reflecting pool on a cart. So I can actually pull it around the backyard according to where the sun's at. Now it is a little too close to the background, so that was just where I initially put it up. But as you can see, I was a little disappointed that my first visitor was actually not a bird, but a squirrel. So that was my first picture, and I wasn't a blind, and I wasn't eye level, so you can see I was at eye level with the squirrel. But maybe one day I'll actually get a bird on it.
But that's an excellent way to do photography, bird photography, if you take the time to do a little something like that. I'm sorry, go ahead, Cindy.
And here's something pretty simple that I built a few weeks ago. It's just a saucer dish, like you would put a potted plant on. And I put some pebbles and some big river rocks, and then that the copper drip line there. And I didn't have that thing set up 5 minutes before the Carolina wren jumped in it, splashed around, and then jumped up on my patio chair. So it was perfect because, again, that's a really beautiful example of, how rich and creamy the background can be. But if you don't have a lot of space or a lot to work with, something as simple as a little drip line in a dish can work just fine.
And there's nothing cuter than a soaking wet bird.
Right.
It's adorable.
And I tell you, I actually saw the little fraying on my patio chair. So obviously that's not the first bird to perch on my chairs. There you go.
Yeah. Okay, human behavior. Stay in front of your subject, don't follow it. Chasing almost never works. And believe me, I do it all the time and I know it doesn't work. To get closer, look distracted with no eye contact. Stay downwind, and that is applying to animals that can smell you. No sudden movements, starting, stopping, suddenly raising, and aiming the camera is the one that usually does me. And I'll be being real careful, and then suddenly I'll see something and I'll move the camera to get the picture, and that's what scares the bird away. So you just have to be kind of very mindful of that. Don't slam car doors. Hold your camera and gear close to the body. Use a blind, a tree, a bush, a car, all of those things to hide behind is very helpful. Subdued clothing we spoke to. Remain quiet. And if you have silent mode on your camera, it's really good idea to use that. Next.
This is an example of extreme dedication and human behavior. I actually made my husband dress up in his ghillie suit, but it's funny, but there are really serious photographers who will put a ghillie suit on and crawl around on the ground.
Mm-hmm. What's it called?
It's a ghillie suit, and what it's really for is military snipers wear them.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, that's what it really is. But hunters also and photographers wear them as well.
Boy, that must be hot in August.
Actually, it looks hot, but it's actually very it's a net material, so there is some pretty good airflow.
Oh, cool.
Animal behavior and storytelling. Okay. Capturing bird behavior is harder than any other aspect of bird photography because they see you before you see them. They become alert the moment they see you. The alert bird is always ready to fly. Birds tend to ignore you when they're hungry. You can observe their behavior when they're comfortable. So wait patiently until the bird ignores you. Visit a location several days in a row until the birds become comfortable with your presence, or you get an opportunity, the right opportunity. And my example for that would be Powhatan Creek Trail, where I can't say your name all of a sudden. There's a lot of people that go there, and it's like a walkway kind of thing, this bridge area, and people are walking back and forth. I see dogs and bikes and everything else, but it's a great place to go looking for birds. Mm-hmm. Visit a spot where you think they will frequent and wait. Birds and animals are creatures of habit. They have their favorite trees and resting places. Let the birds come to you. Avoid bird calls. The bird may come to investigate the call, but it is no longer exhibiting its natural behavior, and it may stress the bird if used repeatedly. And I've tried it before and I've never had very good luck with it. And I think I did it more when I was first doing birding, and I didn't realize that when it did work, I didn't realize that I was disturbing the bird. I wasn't thinking my way through it. And I rarely do it anymore. And sometimes if I'm out there all by myself and it's late in the afternoon and I've seen 0 birds, I will just yell at the birds and yell, get out here. And then of course they're not coming.
Okay, Carol. Let me ask you a question. Let
Oh,
me ask you a question.
Yes. Yeah, I've done that before too. Try
That's
to
a
imitate them.
That's a cardinal, isn't it?
Oh, cardinals say, we eat potato chip, 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 chips.
I thought they did.
cardinals have a lot of different sounds.
I thought they did. I thought that was the cardinal.
It might be.
Yeah.
Whistling is another thing that is, you can try that. But again, if it works, you're doing the same thing as using a bird call, and it disturbs them. So it's really
Especially
not a
in
good
spring.
idea.
Sorry, especially in the spring when they're already
Mhm.
stressed from breeding. It's really
Mhm.
bad to use the calls.
And the thing is, if you pull a bird away from what it's doing, it can put it at risk for other predators, or if it's at nesting, it might put, if it's leaving the nest to investigate, it could put the eggs or, with the chicks at risk. So it's really not a good thing to do. Spend time observing. The more time you spend in the field watching the birds, the more knowledge you gain about their behavior. Be still, best to be still and wait. This particular picture, if you're talking about telling stories, I actually, I like to give some pictures captions. And in this one, the bird on the left is yelling at the other 2 birds and telling them not to eat the berries. Next. Okay. Bird behavior shots can tell a story, such as habitat showing surroundings with the birds as element instead of the front and center. Some examples of bird behavior are eating, defending territory, romance, building, stretching, stalking, parenting, bathing, fishing, seeming to interact with other birds, preening. Preening is not usually the most desirable pose to capture because it's, for the viewer, they're seeing it in an odd position, and a lot of times you can't see the eye. So this one didn't come out too bad, but a lot of times that's not really the best position to keep. Next. So here's some examples of their behaviors. Eating, we love to capture pictures with birds eating. The white-eyed vireo on the left has a caterpillar, and the Carolina chickadee on the right is actually eating the new growth on the tree. And I think Cindy got that one through her kitchen window.
I did. Yeah.
Next. More eating. We have a white-throated sparrow eating a Bradford pear berry. And I have another captioned one on the right. That's Ben and Jerry. And Ben on the left won't look because Jerry's trying to show him what's in his mouth. Next.
It's so stern.
And some more eating. And this is a cedar waxwing eating the Bradford pears. And everybody loves prothonotary warblers, and it's so special when you can get one with an insect. And that is at Powhatan Creek Trail.
Yeah.
Next. Romancing. We love romance. I love the ones, the laughing gulls on the right. You can kind of see what they're doing. And the ones out, the waxwings on the left, we're passing food back and forth to each other. Next. Fishing. These are both osprey, and those are both at my pond with their fish. Next. Nesting. Powhatan Creek Trail had, for a little while, had the blue-gray gnatcatchers were building a nest, and it was just right there at the walkway, and something destroyed it. So they never did. They completed their nest in a different location. And then on the right, you have a
Dark-eyed
dark-eyed junco. He's so cute. He's got his nesting material ready to go start a nest. Next. Stretching. And I love that owl. The owl is stretched.
And that's
there's-
a red-tailed hawk.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
did say owl, didn't I? I knew that. So, and the indigo bunting is on the left stretching. Next. And you guys saw this already, dispute. That was the two eastern bluebirds. Next. And this dispute is two
Fence lizards.
eastern fence lizards, yeah.
Yeah, I took
And
a
didn't-
series of shots. I'm sorry, I took a series of shots, and I'm not going to show you the last shot, but one walked away with the tail of the other in his mouth. So there was a definite winner and loser.
Definitely tells a story.
Yeah.
Next. And this is two eagles up in the sky with having a little dispute. That was really too far away, but I couldn't resist taking the pictures. Next. Parenting. Look at the expression on the mother's face. If animals can have an expression. Certainly tells a story. Next. Focus. Jump ahead just for a second. This is actually my attempt at panning, which I haven't done very well with panning, but that's a double-crested cormorant. Focus. Tips for some sharp focus. Use autofocus, not manual. I don't think anybody would use manual focus for birds, but you never know. For focus mode, you want focus point selection should be single point or spot. That's good for shooting birds that are small birds, and especially birds that are like stationary. And you can shoot through obstructions like vegetation. Use expanded points or zone for tracking, and that would be for birds that are in flight. This would have been with a wider focus area in this particular shot. Shutter speed should be greater than, this is just a regular rule, should be greater than the focal length of your lens. And having said that, it doesn't always, there's a lot of these rules that you just don't end up using. But so if that was with a 600 millimeter lens, I should have had that at least at 1/640th. Usually you want a shutter speed of 1/1250 or greater, and people they go way up to like 1/3200th for birds in flight. Another thing is to customize the setting on your camera to work for you and get to know your camera. If you can do back button focusing, that usually helps. I know Cindy hasn't had as much luck with it, but and I think that we looked at that, and I think in her case it was hard to manipulate both a button in the back and the shutter button at the same time. But also, if you can customize your buttons on your camera, like on mine, I have it set so that I can move my thumb from one button to the other to move it from single point focus over to tracking with a wide focus area just by touching one thing on the back. So if I'm taking pictures of a small bird and suddenly I see a big bird coming along, I can just quickly go to it. And it's all about knowing your camera and what kind of customized settings you can make work for you. Next. It's all about the eyes. Catch light, reflection, silhouette, and being creative. And this is another good example of a high key photograph as well, with a very white background. This is in the snow. Cindy took this one. This is a great shot.
Yeah, that was in Yellowstone.
Next. This is about the eyes. And if you look at these two, this was two frames, like one right after the other. And the bird hadn't even moved, but birds are always moving and their eyes are always moving. And in the one in the back, he appears to be looking kind of up, where the one in the front, he's actually looking more at the photographer. So if you were to see which one you liked better, theoretically, at least you would like the one that's in the front better. Next.
And I just wanted to put this up because I just think it's creepy that I took this photograph and didn't really notice that it didn't look like it was looking at me, but maybe it was. Obviously the resolution isn't that great, you know, cropping it like that, but I just wanted to give an example of how creepy an animal can actually be looking at you.
And they were looking, I'm sure he was looking at you. And not
Yeah,
only
I
that,
was-
he was smiling at you too.
Yeah, I was the only one there, so yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure he saw you. Next. And then this is the catch light. Catch light is a reflection of light source in the eye of the subject, highly desirable to the point that many bird photographers simply delete any photo that doesn't have it. Some clone in catch lights, but that's distasteful and often doesn't look natural. These two are pine siskins, and the one on the right, they were taken one right after the other. And what a difference it makes just when the bird just moves slightly and you got the catch light on the left side. At least I think it makes a big difference. Next.
And this is an example, oh, sorry. This is an
No.
example of where, yeah, you've got some catch light, but it's actually a reflection. And I know that y'all can't tell what the reflection is, but that's actually me in my car. Again, that was at Yellowstone. So I've actually seen better photographs that show, you know, a better reflection than that, but I thought that was a little creepy too, so.
Oh, I thought that was that's an interesting shot. And that's another example of a high definition too, or excuse me, high key, because you've got a white background, and that's a raven, by the way, in the snow. It's just very cool. We don't see ravens around here. So yeah, very interesting. And I love that eye is really cool. So silhouettes, it's a technique where we capture their flight, movement, or portraits in a manner where only their dark outlines are visible. It can be difficult to focus on a dark subject trying to place the focus point. Try placing the focus point on the edge of the bird's outline. The bird on the left is actually the same bird you saw before. It's the indigo bunting, and I was playing around with it. It wasn't the best picture in the world. I just liked the shape of it. The picture on the right is pretty sharp, and I think it came out all right. And it takes the viewer top to bottom, left to right, which is nice. Too bad there's only 2 birds in the picture instead of 3. Those are brown-headed cowbirds. So the birds are not a desirable bird, but I like the silhouette that it created. Next. Birds in flight. You want the wind and the sun at your back. Birds fly into the wind, and they fly slower when they're flying into the wind. If you can ID the flight path, it will help you if you have a sense of where the birds are going to fly. Try to shoot against a clean background. Try for their eye level near rivers, lakes, on a hill for eye level. Another thing, if you happen to be shooting a perched bird and you want to catch it when it flies, birds almost always poop before flying. So if you see it poop, get ready because it's probably going to fly. These are at Dutch Gap, and the background is nice and clean on the one on the left. The one on the right is not as clean, but it works because it's the color. It makes it, you know, they really stand out against that bright color, and their eyes show up nicely. Always it's about the eye. Next. These pictures aren't specific to what I'm talking about. There just happen to be some birds in flight. Use autofocus tracking. If you're shooting a bird that's coming at you, and I don't of the birds in flight, these are all going sideways. But if you're shooting a bird that's coming toward you, try to pre-focus on something on the area where you'd like to pick up the bird. If you've got a bird coming and it's like so far in the distance that you can hardly tell what it is, and you try to focus on it back there, and you got a long ways to go before it gets to you, you're going to be working to get it focusing all the way in. But if you can pick an area maybe halfway between you and the bird to get something where you focused a little bit on, then it'll be easier for you to pick up the focus as the bird comes closer to you. Did that make any sense? Flip, if you're using a lens that has a long, a lens foot, flip it up if you're doing handheld so that you can cradle the lens in your hand rather than having that foot hanging down and kind of getting in your way. Follow with your body, tuck your elbows into your body. Bump focus. And I think this is kind of what you'd be doing as the bird is moving closer to you. You press the focus button intermittently as your subject approaches to keep it in focus. And then when the bird is in range, hold the button, focus button, sorry. Use the focus limiter if you have one and set it to ignore close objects. Next. You may turn off image stabilization if you're using a very high shutter speed. I actually don't do that, but I've read a lot that says that you should do it, and I should probably try it. You're going to want your shutter speed 1250 to around 3200. F8 for better depth of field and more bird detail. Full manual mode and exposed for the bird. A very bright sky may open up as much as 2 stops. If you try to use auto ISO on a bird that's flying in the sky and it's a bright day, it's gonna give you a very low ISO because it's trying to expose for the sky. So you really, it's hard to use auto ISO. For me, it is anyway. It's real hard to use auto ISO. Better to expose for the bird. Autofocus settings expand beyond the single point focus. I use zone, that's what it's called on my camera. And the next tip is practice. You can't get enough practice. For panning, and the only panning picture I had was that cormorant that was way back at the beginning. You use and I haven't really had much success at this. I need to practice on it. Use a slow shutter speed as low as 1/30th to 1/160th. Keep the camera level and track at the same speed as the subject. Wings will blur, but the head and body will stay sharp. You can use a tripod for that. Slow shutter speed means you let in more light, so you have to be careful not to overexpose. You can use a tripod with a gimbal head. No matter what kind of, whenever you've got birds in flight, try to have space for the bird to fly into, just like with that little hummingbird, they need somewhere to go. Slow shutter for movement, fast for freeze. Perspective. Avoid shooting straight up in the sky. It requires overexposure to get the underside of the bird, and it's less dynamic, and it's not really a very interesting shot. Next. Editing. I would hope that we all shoot in RAW. RAW allows you get more detail to work with in post. And it's, it's the way to go. Avoid changing, stamping out elements, especially for contests. Keep it honest. Oh, I should go. Okay, I'm sorry. I should go through this. We're going to talk about cropping, position, adjustments, sharpening, and removing clutter. Next. Avoid cropping too much. Well, if you accidentally crop a wing in the shot, which I did on here, I cropped half of a wing out, balance it by cropping the other wing. An advantage is that in a tight composition for a more intimate look at the subject. It can reduce the image quality. Don't crop so much that the bird feels squished. And that's that's unrelated to the wing cropping. It's just an example there. In flight, give it to space to fly. Do adjust exposure. These are in editing. Adjust your exposure, your contrast, your vibrancy. Be careful not to oversaturate. And I've seen people do that where it's things that come out looking bizarre and you wonder, why is this bird such a strange color? Because they've saturated so much. Next. Sharpening.
Yeah, this is an example of a program that I use called, actually Carol and I both use Topaz. The way I feel about sharpening is if I look at a photograph, one that I've taken, if it looks like I sharpened it, then I've over sharpened it. So this is an example of the original on the left, and then just a tiny bit of sharpening on the right. My opinion is I don't think I overdid it. So, but I am interested to see what everybody else thinks. If it looks like I've sharpened the one on the right.
I think it
No,
looks great.
it looks natural. And the beak actually has better color. It's not as over washed out as it was on the one on the left.
Yeah. So that's, again, I think that's a good example of if it doesn't look like I sharpened it, then I've done it the right way.
Yeah, it's easy to over sharpen.
Yeah.
And I use Lightroom, and I'm probably guilty of over sharpening. Lightroom has a default sharpening, and if you're not careful, you do that, and then if you put it in Topaz and sharpen it some more, it can get real. And they look funky when they get over sharpened.
Oh,
Next.
sorry. And this is an example of reducing noise. This is an Acadia flycatcher, and you can see the left. There was quite a bit of noise, and then ran it through Topaz denoise, and it really smoothed things out quite a bit.
That looks really good. The thing with taking noise out is to be careful, not because you can end up making this one looks good, but you can end up making a bird look like a wax statue if you take the noise reduction to extreme. So you have to be careful about that. One more thing before we go on, I just put it in tonight. When you're editing, look for dust spots. I hate it when I see a picture, a beautiful picture of a bird, and then there's little spots of dirt all over the picture and they didn't bother to clean it up. It's easy enough to take care of. And then if you do have that, it's probably a good time to clean your sensor.
And this is a good example too. You can see it better in the photo on the right. You see the little speck of white right below the beak.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly, my lens was clean, but I think that was just something hanging off the beak, but maybe I should have removed it. I think it would have been better if I would have removed it.
Mhm.
That's another thing though that we do with our own pictures. I know I do it. I blow a lot of mine up to like 300% when I'm looking at them to really compare them and try to see exactly what I've got there. And that's very likely part of the bird. When I'm talking about dust on the sensor though, I'm usually, most of the time when you see that on somebody's picture, it'll be on a blue sky. You'll see these little dots all over the place and they look awful.
Mhm.
Next.
Okay, just a few closing thoughts about ethics. You don't want to disturb any sensitive subjects, especially birds, especially nesting owls. They're very popular, but again, that human behavior and interaction, you could actually disturb the bird and cause the bird to change their behavior. So just always be cognizant of that. You don't want to do anything to change the subject's behavior. Don't force it to fly or to run away or to stop eating or to stop resting. Again, you would be interfering with the natural behavior of the animal. And it's really important to show common courtesy and respect for other photographers. There's nothing more frustrating than showing up an hour before sunrise, getting situated, waiting for your subject to appear. Everything's nice and quiet, and somebody drives up in a car and slams the car door. Again, going back to human behavior. But it's always nice to be a nice person. Respect others and let others know that you are present so they're aware, but keep your distance. Don't run intercept between other photographers and subjects, and stay quiet, as quiet as you possibly can. And I really love it if I'm photographing somewhere and someone walks up very quietly and waits for the right time to just be nice and ask for permission to share the space. Hey, do you mind if I, step up next to you and take a few photographs? I've never had anybody tell me no, and I would never tell anybody no, but it's just the nice thing to do. Not only should we respect private property, but you can actually be ticketed for trespassing. So if you're not sure if it's private or not, don't take the chance, just don't go. Little quick story. I was in Yellowstone, at Fort Yellowstone, right there in Mammoth Hot Springs. And I had gotten word that there were a pair of great horned owls with two little owlets. And there were photographers trespassing into a person's private yard to photograph the owls, because people do live there. And my husband and I, we actually stayed in the street and was trying to photograph from the street, so we weren't trespassing. Well, the lady who owned one of the homes came over, introduced herself. Later found out she was the wife of like the big general manager of Yellowstone, the whole park. But she walked me up to her friend's house and introduced me. And that lady asked all the other photographers to leave and allowed me to photograph as long as I wanted in her yard. And so that's just what can happen if you respect people's privacy and their personal property, and just being kind and courteous. Just a note about feeding wild animals. You should never feed wild animals. First of all, you're going to train the animal that humans are the source of their food, which is never a good idea. Human food can be toxic and cause dependency, but it can actually harm the animals. Up at Dutch Gap, there is a man who goes around and he cleans out pizza restaurant garbage dumpsters for scraps of pizza, and then thinks it's a good idea to go up to Dutch Gap and throw the pizza out to the birds. That is so bad. And I felt enough responsibility just to explain why it's bad for the birds. Obviously he didn't care, but I could walk away because I let him know, and it's up to him to make that decision. You can be ticketed by law enforcement, by game wardens for feeding wild animals. We have a lady in the neighborhood who likes to she likes to feed deer, which is illegal throughout certain parts of the year. But what it does is it brings the vultures in, and now the vultures are creating property damage on people's roofs. Their excrement is extremely acidic and can actually eat through your shingles, the shingles on your roof. So, please don't do it, and encourage other people not to do it. Don't alter or destroy habitat. We shouldn't be doing that anyway. But I don't think it's hurtful to maybe, flatten, some blades of grass for that beautiful flower picture. But when you're talking about animals, you really just don't want to go out there and break, tree limbs and things like that just to get a photograph. Most importantly, just follow rules and laws. A lot of places have rules and laws that keep you out of breeding areas during some parts of the year. You just don't want to get caught in areas where it's not lawful to be there. So those are just some notes on ethics.
Very good. Next. The end. If there's anybody has any questions.
All I could say is, wow, you guys really knocked the ball out of them. I mean, unbelievable. What's so wonderful is you're so enthusiastic about it, and that's what you need to really delve and study and go deeper and deeper and deeper with your knowledge, and it really shows. I mean, your images are stunning. Every one was drop dead gorgeous.
I'm going to stop sharing so we can all talk if you'd like.
Yeah.
All righty.
And that was really good.
Oh,
Yes.
amazing.
It was a lot of fun.
Amazing.
Where do you get so many white-eyed vireos?
I have white-eyed vireos in the neighborhood.
Oh,
They're at my pond, and they are. It's funny because they're like all over the place, and they're really hard to find right now because they're deep into the brush. But there's babies, and they're just all over. They're even down in the field too, I think. Yeah, they are. I have white-eyed vireos, and we have a lot of really beautiful birds that are in my neighborhood at this field area, but it's very sad because it's been partially cleared now, and they're going to be building there soon. So it's all going to disappear. It's real sad.
Now, when you talk about feeding animals, I mean, we have bird feeders out. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. I'm talking about going out into the wild
Oh,
and throwing meat to animals, or throwing,
right.
yeah, bird feeders. Actually, bird feeders are very good. I would
Thank you.
would just ask you, oh, absolutely. I just ask you that, you know, it's more costly to buy the higher quality bird feed. You can go and buy the cheap bag, but it's a lot of filler and it's not really very nutritious for the birds.
Mhm.
So I do get the higher quality, the nuts and the fruits, and you know, I don't like a mess, so I get the no mess from Wild Birds Unlimited.
Mhm.
I probably have the best fed birds in all of Williamsburg, I think.
Oh, you got so many in your yard.
I do. I have a perfect environment, but no, I highly encourage bird feeders.
Mhm. What I found with hummingbirds, I was able to sit by my feeder quietly, and within 20 to 30 minutes, they were feeding as if I wasn't there.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
They're very,
Um,
very forgiving, and I was
Do
able to be 4 feet away. And
Yeah.
my 18 to 140 did a great job at that distance.
Oh, yeah.
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 So-
Hummingbirds are a lot of fun. Well, I shot hummingbirds last year. I don't shoot them at the feeder because my feeder is in a bad spot, but I did get them in the flowers, and that was a lot of fun. The other thing when we're talking about feeding birds is I would assume that we already know this, but it's 1 part sugar to 4 parts water.
Mhm.
You don't use the red stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
The purchased stuff.
Right.
And I'll tell you a perfect example of using the remote shutter is I'll set my tripod and my gimbal head up on my covered patio, and I will focus it on the hummingbird feeder, and I'll sit there. I'll sit back in my chair, and with that little button in my hand, and
Mhm.
I can actually, in my peripheral vision, and I can actually hear them coming, you know, the buzzing. And so the minute they're within focus range, I'm hitting that shutter button, and I'm sitting back, you know, drinking my iced tea, which hitting that shutter button. So that's the lazy way to do it.
Yeah.
Another and another thing, I didn't talk about it in here, but talking about using tripods for one example of locally, it's hard to think of a place where a tripod is a good place, at least from my perspective. Now, in the spring, and we've already passed the time, and I did not get down there this year, but down at Lions Bridge in Newport News, the osprey go fishing, and the photographers, we sit on the side of there's like a kind of, it's a road, but there's like just a grassy area next to it's on the James River, and you sit out there and you can use your tripod because you know where they're going to be, and you can follow them as they dive in for fish. And the other place that comes to my mind, and I've only been there once because it's too far away, is Conowingo Dam. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. It's in Maryland, I think, and it's famous for eagles. When they release the water that goes through this dam, and with it comes the fish, and with the fish come the eagles. And the photographers, usually there's like hundreds of people that line up with their big giant lenses and tripods, and they're ready, and they get these fabulous pictures of the eagles going in for fish.
Mhm.
And those are times when you really do need a tripod. For all of the birds that I do, I don't ever use my tripod anymore. I just, it's too much stuff to carry around.
Right. Well, we set up my tripod with my camera, and we practiced remotely, my grandson and I, and he's dying to put it up by the bird feeder so we can get up nice and close and personal. He says, can we say, he calls it the contraption. Just say it's the tripod. He's very excited. He wanted to go out and shoot again today. I have some prints he wants me to make. He's building a book of his images, which is
All right.
interesting.
That's great.
He's 8 years
Yeah.
old. Yeah. What I was going to say to you, and I think you know my feeling that I love to shoot candids, and I think
love to
some of the
shoot what?
expressions- candids, candid photography,
Oh, yeah, oh, okay.
candid. So in other words, of my family.
Mhm.
But sometimes, like your birding, you've got a beautiful image, but the background is wanting, and that's where I've been trying to work with masks and take
Oh.
that image and move it into somewhere else, and and you can change the bokeh. There's all sorts of things you can do.
Yeah.
It's
The
just a
only thing
question of how much time you want to spend on an image.
Yeah.
you
The only
know?
thing with birding, if you're going to do that with birding, it's a good idea to, if you are showing the picture somewhere, or if you're posting it online, that you explain that you did that and don't try to pass it off as the natural setting for that bird.
Right.
And if you're entering in a contest, you really can't do anything like that.
Right.
Part of the problem with birding is that all these rules and tips and everything that I read, the birds didn't read any of it.
Right. Exactly. I think you should submit the two bluebirds fighting. I just think that's a fabulous.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
That's a fabulous.